When I was in 7th grade, between the latter half of 1997 and beginning of 1998, I managed to strike a deal with my old man. If I could get a B average in school for a change rather than C, he would get me a Sony PlayStation at the end of the academic year. With Squaresoft's latest installment for my favorite franchise dangling from the fishing line, I tried, for the first time in my life, to actually pay attention and do well in my classes. In June of 1998, I was rewarded with a brand spanking new PlayStation for my efforts, and with it came a demo disc teasing gameplay from about a dozen different titles. From Parappa the Rapper to Armored Core to Gex 2 Enter the Get-Go, there were plenty of titles to sample for when I'd inevitably set Final Fantasy VII aside. One of those demos I tried was Tomb Raider 2, a highly discussed game of the PlayStation and plastered all over gaming magazines of the time. I eagerly booted up the demo to see what all that hype was about, and I thought it controlled like trash and I never touched it again. The point of this overindulgent preamble is to illustrate not only the complete lack of nostalgia I hold for Tomb Raider as a franchise, but my complete lack of expectation for the character or the game's narrative. It is the very story of Rise of the Tomb Raider that I wish to discuss in this video, but in order to get there I must perform a long-winded exercise in which I ask a very obvious seeming question. Who is Lara Croft? While I imagine there are a lot of thoughts and ideas regarding her character and personality, I want to figure out who she is according to the first two games of this rebooted franchise. She's clearly not the gender-bent fusion of Indiana Jones and James Bond that the ads, magazine covers, and box art gave me the impression of in the 90s. Nevertheless, this question will inform Rise of the Tomb Raider's story and the various thematic elements it tries to tackle. It should go without saying, but there will be spoilers for both Tomb Raider and Rise of the Tomb Raider in this video. I should also clarify that whenever I refer to the first one, or something to that effect, I am of course referring to the 2013 reboot. Now that we've cleared that up, who is Lara Croft? If I'm honest, when I first asked myself this question, the only answer I could come up with was a person that loves history and artifacts. While there is certainly more to her, I don't think it's a coincidence that this is the aspect of her that stands out the most. It's where she as a character and the player's own agency intersect. The collectibles within the Tomb Raider games exist because I, as a player, wish to collect them, and the games contextualize them by giving Lara an intrinsic motivation to seek them out. This doesn't necessarily characterize Lara though, it merely handwaves an explanation to include a mechanic. What makes Lara a historian is her reaction to discovering these old relics of the past. No, not that awkward, blank-faced, puppet-mouthed expression in the first game. The voice work of actress Camilla Luddington as she describes the different artifacts she finds.
There are small bone fragments in the mortar well. Hopefully animal bones. An ivory jar. It looks like it was carved from a single tusk. A simple thing, but the level of detail in the carving is impressive.
If anything characterizes Lara, it's the elation and enthusiasm emanating from her voice as she describes her latest find. She doesn't simply give the most basic of facts or information, she details the artifact and the era from which it comes with the excitement of someone that understands the significance and value of what they've just uncovered. This includes potential elation or disappointment when the player takes the time to further examine select artifacts.
Hold on. This one has 6 on most of the faces. Interesting. It's been altered with this rough strap of leather and it's been used to store plants. Oh wait, it's a fake. Made in China.
Note in that last one, the mild amusement that's intermingled with the disappointment that it's an imitation. Across both games, Lara continues to enthusiastically describe each of her findings with such zeal, giving each one meaning not only to the player, but to Lara herself. It should be noted that she doesn't start off so confident in her discoveries either. In the early cutscenes of the first Tomb Raider, we see doubts crossing her mind. She believes she is onto something, but she's also young, unproven, and working with the more experienced Dr. Whitman.
I'm close to something. I'm sure of it. I just don't know if the others will listen. Or even if they should.
By the time Rise of the Tomb Raider rolls around, Lara's theories have not only proven true, but she's borne witness to and survived incredible, unbelievable things. So when she's examining artifacts and portraying her intellectual side, we get a real sense that she's not only in her element, but she's a lot more confident in her abilities to work things out.
Everything radiates out from this point. That puts the center of this city under the lake. But, something's not right. The cathedral, Where the atlas was. It's on the wrong side of the map. Keep rotating it. Stop! That's it. Kitesh isn't under the lake. It's under the glacier. The divine source must be there.
Gone is that doubt in herself. She knows she has the wits to work these mysteries out and knows she is capable enough to uncover them herself, which leads us to how she became so capable. It's no hidden secret that Lara's whole arc in the first game is supposed to be that of a survivor. Her transformation has also been thoroughly critiqued already, as the demands of a AAA video game reliant upon third-person shooting combat demands she swiftly become comfortable to taking the life of another. Writer Rhianna Pratchett herself discussed the rushed nature of Lara's adaptation in an interview with Killscreen, and the difficulty of narrative and gameplay being at odds. In her words,
"It's about balancing the needs of gameplay with the needs of narrative. The needs of narrative don't always trump the needs of gameplay. In fact, it's usually the other way around. And so I'd say from a narrative perspective, we would have liked the ramp up to be a bit slower, but there are other factors to be considered. When players get a gun, they generally want to use the gun. We were brave in going such a long time without giving players a gun in a game where you end up doing a lot of shooting. We tried to innovate a little bit, but narrative can't always win. Ideally, if you can find a sweet spot, that's great, but sometimes combat or gameplay or whatever has to win out."
Nevertheless, it sort of begs the question of what being a survivor means. Yes, Lara survives, but given the nature of the game, it seems that she survived because she eventually refused to be a victim. She chose to save herself, which, in a way, implies she's not unlike the game's villain, Matthias, who also played an active role in his own survival. I don't want to draw any definitive conclusion regarding Lara and her parallels with the stranded locals. It's quite possible the developers wanted to create that comparison and explore how survival can strip away some of what makes you human, and there's certainly some evidence to that being the case. But she never lacks such sympathy that she succumbs to the same darkness as Matthias. If you really dig into the narrative of Tomb Raider, Lara's not the only one who uncovers a hidden self. The island had a tendency to bring out the real potential or weakness of those it had shipwrecked. Truth, one might say. Lara is perhaps the most obvious, becoming aware of how strong and capable she really is. All of her self-doubt washed away. Lara's manic pixie dream best friend Sam discovers that her bloodline makes her the perfect vessel for an ancient Japanese goddess. Who knew? Women's true cowardice and craven nature is revealed as he works with Matthias and his crazed followers. It turns out geeky Alex is a lot more brave than he gave himself credit for. We learn that Roth is father to Reyes' child. While the game's marketed theme is becoming a survivor, I think the most descriptive concept driving the narrative of Tomb Raider is uncovering the truth. Be it the real location of Yamatai, the artifacts of the tombs, or who everyone truly is on the inside. The game's narrative is as much about spiritual or emotional excavation as it is archaeological excavation. So, once Lara discovers she's capable of surviving such extraordinary situations, where do we go? Well, I think the original plan of directors Noah Hughes and Daniel Newberger, in partnership with writer Rhianna Pratchett, was to evolve Croft into Lara the Adventurer. However, they didn't get the chance to quite get there. Instead, Rise of the Tomb Raider covers the next step in Lara's journey towards that inevitable destination. While the notion that each new Tomb Raider entry is part of her origin story is commonly mocked, I mean, how many origin stories does someone need? I can appreciate the slow burn that Crystal Dynamics was going for. You don't exactly survive a traumatizing shipwreck where friends die and an ancient Japanese goddess sends her manic, murderous cultists after you and think, yeah, I'd like more of that! Lara knows she is capable, but now she needs to discover the hunger for adventure. She needs to become so far removed from society that she cannot imagine living any way else. Perhaps not as dangerously, but she needs to understand that the wilderness is her element, not the concrete jungle. So Lara becomes obsessed, not with the idea of adventuring, at least not yet, but with the notion of proving her father right. It turns out that Daddy Croft developed himself a rather poor reputation chasing down some MacGuffin of immortality, though it was barely touched on in the prior game, aside from a dropped line at a campfire.
What were those things in the monastery? They were dressed like the storm guard, and the sounds they made almost inhuman. Shit. Just listen to yourself, Lara. You sound like Dad.
The only mention we really have of Lara's dad being considered baddie is her concluding monologue.
I've been so blind, so naive. For years, I resented my father, doubted him like the rest. But he was right about so much. I just wish I could tell him that now.
Of course, the first game wasn't really about Lara's father or her relationship with him. We know he was dead and that she was basing her theory regarding Yamatai off of much of his research, but we really didn't have a reason to believe her relationship with Papa Croft was a negative one. Unfortunately, we have to get all of this in a very brief, but decently executed exposition sequence at the start of Rise of the Tomb Raider. It seems Lara herself believed her old man to be a bit nutty before he allegedly decided to eat a bullet, and now that Lara knows there's truth to his theories, she's overcome with guilt. She isn't obsessed with adventure yet, but she is obsessed with making amends with her dead father. Which brings us to the clearest themes of Rise of the Tomb Raider. We can actually get the most clear representation of these themes in Lara's relationship with her father in the Blood Ties DLC. The expansion allows the player to explore the Croft Manor and discover many letters regarding Richard Croft's work and his marriage to Amelia, Lara's deceased mother. What is important here is Richard's own obsession with his work and what drove it. The day that Amelia had left for the fateful plane that would crash and take her life, Richard had been so absorbed into his work he hadn't even known she left. This is the catalyst for him becoming obsessed with the divine source, an obsession that publicly disgraces him but secretly gets Trinity's attention. So what we have is Richard Croft being an obsessive character, and after experiencing the loss of his love, he becomes obsessed with the idea of preserving life. But we also get two other sides of him. At the game's conclusion, we hear a recording where Richard asks if he has disgraced his father.
My dearest Lara, I often think about how my father would turn over in his grave if he knew the shame I had brought upon our family's name. Croft, what does it even mean?
At the same time, we also see in the Blood Ties DLC how Richard and his butler transformed the basement of their mansion into an Egyptian tomb for Lara's birthday, allowing her an opportunity to explore and do as her parents had. Coupled with a campfire monologue in which Lara reminisces about old excavations with her father, we can see that the Croft legacy was not being disgraced, but upheld and passed on.
Those were my happiest memories, Dad, being out on the digs with you. Especially when you gave me my own little plot to excavate. I liked that.
Richard's relationship with Lara is effectively the summary of Rise of the Tomb Raider's narrative. Death is a part of life, and every day we struggle to accomplish something meaningful with it. However, the most meaningful legacy we can leave behind is through those we love. And if you don't believe my schmaltzy summary, then the game is more than content to pretty much point it out for you.
We aren't meant to live forever. Death is a part of life.
That's easy for you to say. You're not the one who's dying.
But this isn't about you. This is about humanity, about protecting what it means to be human.
So wait, why don't I just simplify the game's theme as a reason to live? Or only finding a reason to live through our mortality or something? Because for many of the characters, their reason for living is to avoid death as they've not yet come to terms with their mortality. Anna and Constantine are probably the two prime examples. Constantine doesn't so much yearn for immortality himself, so much as a way to keep his sister alive while bolstered by his twisted interpretation of God. Constantine can be viewed as a darker parallel to Richard Croft himself, obsessively seeking a solution to a loved one's mortality. Anna herself is fighting the inevitable end that her terminal illness will bring. Standing opposite to them is the character of Jacob, immortal pseudo-Jesus extraordinaire, and the undying ones that he created with the divine source. These two are, in their own way, a living demonstration of how it is death itself that makes life meaningful. A document found in the buried city of Katesh pretty much spells out the walking metaphor of the undying ones.
By day I watch the deathless army, learn the paths they take. They follow the same patterns, day in and day out, like men trapped in a dream. They are fierce, but they are hollow. Whatever made them men is long gone, replaced instead by a soul of cold iron.
The Undying Ones may have everlasting life, but it is a life completely and obsessively devoted to duty. Wait a minute, isn't duty itself a reason to live? Theoretically, yes. Constantine finds motivation and drive in his loyalty to the nebulously evil Trinity organization, after all. So how do the Undying Ones prove that duty itself is not enough of a reason to live? They're effectively walking zombies, just driven by the hunger to protect the divine source instead of a cannibalistic appetite. The Undying Ones have lost their humanity, but our immortal foe Messiah Jacob has not. He has tried to survive the never-ending loss of an everlasting life by devoting himself wholly to his duty. It doesn't quite work out.
I made a mistake today. One that threatens to lead to more mistakes. I spent time alone with Alya. Something I have avoided until now. I must bury these old feelings deep and stay apart from my people for a time.
If Rise of the Tomb Raider's thematic conclusion was merely a purpose to live, then Jacob would have it in protecting the divine source from malicious forces that would abuse its power for violent gain. In doing so, however, he is forced to try and strip away the emotion of love so that he can dull himself to the pain of loss. But if he were to do such a thing, would he not be a walking specter like the Undying Ones? An emotionless life absent of joy as much as it is sadness. It's not so much that life is better because of pain, but the pain is worth it because of the joys of life. So we return to Richard and Lara Croft, who lost wife and mother Amelia. Yes, Richard lost his wife, but it allowed him to see a greater world beyond his work to what he has right now, and so he creates a wonderful birthday game to play with the daughter he had with Amelia, who would grow to joyfully reminisce about such an experience later in her life. So to best summarize, it seems that Rise of the Tomb Raider asserts an immortal life will inevitably lose its spark and meaning. It is instead through legacy that we endure, and though we may suffer pain and loss, we manage to live on in an emotionally resonant fashion. Okay, that's pretty clear cut, so why else does this narrative stand out to me so strongly? I confess that Rise of the Tomb Raider's exploration, for lack of a better term, of religion appeals to me because I'm a religious person myself. If I were more deeply invested in history or politics, then I'm sure I would be digging deeper into the documentation left behind by the Soviets and what sort of parallels could be drawn thematically between them and Lara's own journey. Instead, because of my faith, I find the religious angle to Rise of the Tomb Raider gives it a greater appeal. Not to say that I found it profound or thought-provoking. In truth, I can only wonder if they chose a vague, villainous entity with a pseudo-Christian bent because of the popularity of Assassin's Creed and its eternal war with the Templars. The depth of Rise of the Tomb Raider's theology can pretty much be summed up by quickly examining the very name of Trinity. An obvious allusion to the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost Trinity, with a logo that vaguely looks like a more sinister cross. All you need to know about Trinity's twisted philosophy can be summed up in perhaps Constantine's most cliché scene.
These sins you have forced me to commit, they must have a purpose. Only you can show me the way. And blood it shall be.
I mean, on the surface, Rise of the Tomb Raider seems to be declaring religion bad. But then Jacob himself is kind of a mirror opposite to Constantine. He is wholly devoted not to controlling the world, but to guard it from the manipulative likes of Trinity and their endless supply of other Constantines. While Jacob's own theology can be summarized as spiritual but not religious, it is through him and his people that we can begin to dig into some curious choices on part of the game's creative leads. After finding the geothermal valley, a gorgeous wilderness in the middle of frozen Siberia, you discover documents detailing a sort of return to nature.
We learn to listen to the land. To become stewards, not conquerors. And in turn, the land has offered up its secrets. You only have to listen.
The struggle became second nature, and then a way of life. Our numbers no longer dwindle. We may never be great again, but we will live, this winter and the next.
This really stood out to me. In the book of Genesis, the original role given to Adam, and therefore mankind, was as steward to the world. What is described here is a sort of back to nature that calls to the Judeo-Christian origin of mankind, but in a post-fall sensibility. Is this an intentional look back at our purpose for being? That pseudo-Jesus Jacob would lead his people back to their own Eden? The philosophy is a bit more closely explored in the various hunting lessons scattered about, going so far as to illustrate the importance of balancing the population of the forest creatures. In a game focused on finding one's purpose in life, Jacob and his people have found a more communal purpose to devote themselves to without losing that ever-important humanity. Is this what Rhianna Pratchett or creative directors Hughes or Horton had in mind? I, in my spectacularly awful Google skills, couldn't say one way or another. Nevertheless, coincidental or no, such an observation helps elevate Rise of the Tomb Raider's narrative ambitions above other AAA games for me. Similarly is this image of Lara's father in a flashback, where his head is surrounded by light. The game's many artistic murals portray the prophet in a similar fashion, no doubt because the murals are based around the Byzantine art style. Such works of art would surround the heads of holy persons in a halo of light to indicate their divinity or blessed nature. At least that's the best and most succinct amateur explanation I can provide. To surround Richard's head with light in such a fashion, and even cover his features up in Lara's memory, could suggest the notion of how children view their parents. That Lara is seeking a purpose in her father, much like Constantine seeks his purpose through God. Of course, there are interviews where Rhianna Pratchett is very vocal about having wanted to play more into Lara's own PTSD, rather than her father as a motivational driving force. I'm sure she wouldn't have been keen on Lara viewing her dad as some divine icon. However, cinematic direction and writing are not always tied together, and it's possible that the creative team was trying to explore one's purpose through the lens of faith, legacy, and the Venn diagram, crossing the two over together. Regardless of the intent of the creators or my own reading of them, what I hope to make clear is that Rise of the Tomb Raider made the attempt to address duty and legacy not just in the obvious dialogue and motivations of its characters. Be it art direction or the very setting, we can see other ways in which they approach these questions of purpose and legacy. While the end result is hardly the best narrative told in a game, I think it is still worth noting due to how unexpected it is from a game of this type. I'm not sure what classic Tomb Raider fans wanted out of this series. Square keeps calling this reboot an origin story, but I think reimagining or revision of the character is much more accurate. The first game certainly addresses how a young woman could become such an action hero, but it's Rise of the Tomb Raider that starts to challenge Lara by asking what her reason for being is. Even on a gameplay level, Rise of the Tomb Raider begins to step away from the prior title's efforts to imitate Uncharted, building towards a more stealthy approach with plenty of that wonderful exploration and hidden secrets I love so much in games. Tomb Raider and its sequel are the stepping stones to what could have been an awesome, full-blown reimagining of the Tomb Raider franchise that breaks Lara away from her past, figures out her legacy, and understands her adventurous, scholarly role in the Croft lineage. Yeah, could have been. And hopefully I'll have the patience and time to address Shadow of the Tomb Raider next year. As it is, I hope you enjoyed my self-indulgent dive into the first two games and why I perhaps love them more than they deserve. I was hoping for this to be a bit more on the level with my Transformers video, but, well, to be transparent, I'm not entirely happy with 2018's output, but I'm glad to have made my 4-video goal before year's end. I learned a lot this year and hope to make 2019 my best year yet, so please look forward to it. Remember to share this video if you enjoyed it or know someone else who would, subscribe if you'd like to see more, and if Rise of the Tomb Raider resonates with you for reasons it may not resonate for others, well, feel free to share your feelings in the comments below. Just please try to save any comments regarding Shadow of the Tomb Raider for when I eventually, hopefully get to making that video. And if you want more RamblePak throughout the year, feel free to visit RamblePak64.com for essays and even a podcast. Thank you so much for watching, enjoy whatever holidays you celebrate, and I look forward to bringing more and better videos to you guys in 2019.